and it was not on. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited to have you all here to be hosting this workshop as my first self-hosted workshop. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Allie and I'm the, oh, we got one more person too. Thank you for the new people that just joined us. I am recording. I just told everyone who is on the call that I will be recording, so just be aware of that as you are participating or not in the conversation. So this workshop today is, we're going to be talking about evaluation kind of from the perspective that I like to look at it, which is very community focused and integrated into the everyday work of the organization. So if you've been following my work, if you follow what I do and what I talk about, this is something that will probably be a little bit familiar to you. And if it's something that is not super, or if you haven't been following me, it might be a new approach or it might be a new way to learn about evaluation or look at evaluation and how it might be helpful for your organization. And I'm just going to start out with a couple of housekeeping items. Here's my agenda. So this is designed to be an interactive workshop. I am going to invite you to participate in the chat. I do invite you to speak up and ask questions, share a story. If there's something that you feel like you want to take off your video or your audio to talk about, definitely, you can either raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute if it seems appropriate. I'll trust you to be able to navigate that. I am going to be launching a couple polls, but there's only going to be two. They're going to be pretty basic, just so I can get a little bit of a sense of who's in the room. And there is a workbook, and this workbook is one of the downloads on my website. So you might have seen it already, you might have looked at it, it might have been one of the things that brought you here, but that is really just to facilitate the workshop. You can use it as much or as little as you want to. I am going to be doing a little bit intro, so if you're someone who likes to write on paper and you want to go run and print that out while I'm giving my intros, you're free to do that. And otherwise, if you can use it to take notes, or if you just don't even want to look at it, you're not really missing anything. You can look at it later or not. Sorry, let me just pop a peek at the chat. Oh, and Emily just put that in the chat. Thanks, Em. And then I did put a little note for accessibility requests on the Eventbrite page. For those of you that submitted something, I will definitely be paying attention to them. If there's anything I missed, or if you missed that section of the registration, you can go ahead and just put in the chat if there's something that you need, either to me personally or to Emily individually, or to everyone if you are fine with people seeing that. And then, so just how the workshop is gonna flow, I'm gonna talk a little bit about myself. I'm gonna talk a little bit about evaluation and evaluation backgrounds. And then I'm gonna be walking you through a tool that I use in my own work. That's basically like an approach, a simplified version of the approach that I use when I'm working with my clients or when I'm working with organizations in evaluation. I'm gonna give you a little bit more information about how you can learn more about these ideas or engage with me, and then there will be time for Q&A. If the conversation gets really lively in the middle, that might take up our Q&A time, but if if we're not talking too much, there's definitely time scheduled at the end for that. And anytime you have a question or something to share, just go ahead and either put that in a chat or raise your hand. I will be pausing. There will be a couple times where we'll pause and prompt you to interact a little bit. But other than that, if something pops up, just go ahead and throw it out there however you need to. You don't need to wait till the end. And so I start off all of my workshops, all of the sessions that I lead or teach with a land acknowledgement. And land acknowledgement is a practice that has become a bit more popular over the last couple of years. And it's basically a practice that is adapted or adopted from Indigenous practices that ground a ceremony or a meeting or whatever gathering is happening in place and in the acknowledgement that we are, as human beings, members of our natural environment. And in Indigenous cultures, a big part of that is land stewardship. And so this is where the land acknowledgement practice comes from. In the way that it is currently practiced, it is also serves as an acknowledgement to those Indigenous peoples that have stewarded the lands that we exist on and throughout the world. And so for me, I'm currently situated on Lenape-Hoking. That is, most of you would know, as Brooklyn, New York. I also acknowledge Menominee, Potawatomi, Dakota, and Anishinaabe lands, because those are places that have been really dear to me, really important to me. That's where I grew up, or those are places that I have some kind of personal connection to. If this is an entirely new idea to you, I do have some resources on my website. I am not an authority on land acknowledgement. I am not an authority on Indigenous practices, but it is a place to start. And I would also recommend that you just, you look up your own land that you're on, and then learn a little bit about the tribes and what they have to say about either acknowledgement or the practices of land. And Emily is putting in the chat a link to a map where you can look up the Indigenous lands throughout the entire world. So you can kind of do a search and learn a little bit about where you are, or, you know, any other place that interests you. A little bit more about me, just my background, my bio. I have been doing evaluation now for about 12 years, and I've been running my own practice independently for about 7 of those years. Before I worked independently, I did work for a nonprofit consulting firm. So I've been doing some form of consulting for most of those 12 years that I've been working as an evaluator. I also have a programmatic background in youth work and education, and I have a background in community organizing and advocacy. And I also have a background in dance and performing arts. And so I include all those things in my bio because for me, they influence the way that I look at evaluation, and they influence the way that I work as a consultant, that I work with my clients or the organizations or the community partners that I work with. Sometimes I describe myself as a coach, sometimes I describe myself as a community partner. And so I like to, you know, when I give my professional bio, I think all of those things are really important for me to also talk about. And if you've worked with me, and if you do work with me, hopefully you will see that come up. And so now I'm gonna stop talking for a little bit. Oh wait, I forgot to launch my poll, of course. I am gonna launch a poll so I can learn a little bit about you. Why? Okay, it's not letting me launch my poll. So I would like you to just put in the chat a little bit about you, your name, your organization, maybe your role or what you do, so I can get a little bit of a feel for who's in the room. And then the other thing that I'd like you to put in the chat is why you evaluate. So what do we, I like to start out the conversation asking this question: what do you think of when you hear the word evaluation? And I want to hear, you know, just, you know, answering the question, or like ideas you have about evaluation, experiences you've had about evaluation, just so I can get a sense of who's here and your background and your experiences. Maybe a little bit about why you evaluate in your organization, or what types of evaluation that you do. And I do know several of the people here, but I don't know everyone who is here. So I would love to hear from you who I don't know so well. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you think of when you hear evaluation? Okay, so we've got a student. We've got another nonprofit professional consultant.
And Allie, if you don't mind, if I just jump in quickly, I know a couple of people are having problems accessing that the download to the workbook. So I wanted to just jump in and just let me know in the chat if you haven't already. If you're not able to access it, I'm working on that.
All right. So I would like everyone to put in the chat One word when you think of evaluation. Anything, first thing that comes to mind, biggest thing that comes to mind. I want to get a sense of where we're at. Planning, strategic. Ooh, here's a long one. Okay, another student. Okay. Looking at program effectiveness and outcomes, looking at ways to improve. I want to know if we are meeting objectives. Okay, cool. And so some of the things, when I ask this, I always ask this question, right? In my workshops and the sessions that I lead, you know, what do you think of? Because people have a lot of ideas of evaluation. A lot of them really divert from what I think of as an evaluator. And I've learned in my practice, coming into evaluation, a big part of my job sometimes has to do with talking about what is evaluation and what exactly we are even going to be doing. So most people who come to me, or most people that I talk to about evaluation, have two main buckets of reasons why, you know, they want to either do an evaluation or why they want to learn about it. And one is that it's required. It's usually, this requirement is usually attached to someone like a funding authority, like a donor or a foundation that you're getting a grant from. It can sometimes be attached to, like, if you're working in education or health, like the Department of Education or Health, and it might not necessarily be directly attached to funding, but it's some kind of requirement that somebody is telling you have to do an evaluation, and then you're like, okay, like what does that look like? You have to figure out how to do it. And the second reason that, you know, I hear a lot is about learning, or wanting to know what your outcomes are, or wanting to know how you got your outcomes. Or I hear a lot of people use the buzzword data informed. It's something that's come, you know, pretty popular, or like pretty common the last couple of years. People want to be data informed, right? They want to be using their data. They want to know that they're doing that, but they don't necessarily know what that means, or they don't necessarily know how to do it. And so they look towards evaluation to kind of figure out a way to learn how to do that. And then the other thing that really comes up is that most evaluations I encounter, either as a consultant or when I was a program staff and I was experiencing evaluation, is that they tend to be isolated, program specific, and really focused on reporting. And so an example of this is I used to manage an after-school program. And my role, my job was to manage the students after school and, you know, help them with their homework or implement some programming. And they all lived in the same apartment building. And our little program was at the basement of this apartment building. And in that part of the building, they also had a computer lab, they had social workers, they had childcare, they had career support, and they had all of these services. And when I was experiencing evaluation, I would get like a survey for these kids to fill out, and I would give it to them. They would fill it out really fast, barely looking at the thing, and then they would hand it off to me, and I would hand it off to whoever. And that was all we noticed about our evaluation. We assumed that it went somewhere, that somebody did something with it, but we didn't know what it was or what it even had to do with us. You know, it's just kind of this thing that you have to do. And so not only was it not really integrated into what we were doing as members of the program, but it wasn't integrated into any of these other things that were happening in the center as far as we knew. We really just didn't have any kind of experience with it. And I assume, you know, the last piece focused on reporting is that when I'm called in as an evaluator, when I'm called in as a consultant, a lot of my work and a lot of the things I'm asked to do are really focused on what we're going to report out, what we're going to send to a funder or, you know, the Department of Ed or whoever that might be. It's not necessarily focused on the program and who's experiencing the program and what people are doing. And so I talk a lot about building an evaluation culture within an organization that is really focused on learning, so that you're using the tools of evaluation, not only to give, you know, your funder what they need or someone else what they, you know, need to know about what you're doing, but you're using it for your own purposes, really. You're using it to learn about what you're doing. You're using it to make changes and improvements. I think that one of the things that comes up you know, when I talk to people about evaluation, is that it feels like busy work. And, you know, I think if you're doing evaluation in a way that's really supportive and building an evaluation culture, it should really be cutting down on some of that extra work and that extra admin time that might be going towards logging a million surveys that these students are filling out that doesn't really seem to have much effect on what the program is doing. And if you're able to do that effectively and you're able to do that in a way that works with the program, you can use that then to communicate to your funders and say, hey, we made these changes because we found this out, or we made this decision because of some of the things that we learned while we were doing our evaluation. And you can, you know, show your commitment to this learning culture and to your own improvement and wanting to learn and grow and change and do what you need to do to serve your population or to learn about what your outcomes might be. And this is a quote from Gabby Strong, who is an Indigenous activist and leader and works with the Indian Collective. And it's something that really grounds me in my evaluation work. This is a quote from a keynote address she gave at a conference I was at in Minnesota last fall. And it says, the people and community are more than just numbers and data sets demonstrating impact. Know the stories behind those numbers because we need them both. Amplify those stories, elevate those stories and those changing narratives. And why this really speaks to me as an evaluator is that it attaches people to those numbers and it attaches people to the data points. And I think it's really grounding when we're thinking about evaluation in not only seeing evaluation as this data and this information that we pass along, but it's really attached to people and their experiences and the programs or the communities that we're working with. And so when we're doing evaluation and we're planning for our evaluations or designing our evaluations, how can we make sure that we are centering the people who are giving us that information or who are subjects of that information? And so now we're going to get into the interactive part where I'm going to actually ask you to think a little bit. This is a very simplified kind of process to how I do my work, but I think it's a good example of how we can think about evaluation in this way, and also, you know, how we can start to build evaluation culture and use evaluation for learning. So I would like you to all to think of a question. And when I ask people to think of this question, I always encourage you to don't think of an evaluation question, right? What you would define as an evaluation question. Think of something that you're curious about, or something that, like, if you knew the answer to this question, it would help you do your work. It would help you be able to make a decision, or it would help you improve your programs, or it would help you, you know, answer some kind of conundrum that's happening. And so these are just some examples of some evaluation questions you might ask. What impacts do we have on our students? How has our program impacted health disparities? So that one's a little bit more community level. Some of these are more like individual or program level, and some of them are more community level. How do our participants feel in our program? What is working well? How do we attract more participants? How did our pivots to online learning work out? And what needs does our community have that aren't being fulfilled? And I think that this last one is one that often doesn't get asked. As nonprofit professionals, we get very focused on our work, right? We know our work very deeply and we know what we do, and we're always thinking about the next program change or the next idea that we have. And we don't necessarily think too deeply about what is missing or what is an opportunity for a service that we could provide that we might have access to. And so I'm going to be working with an example, and that example is based on, this is not a totally real example, it's kind of based on some experiences that I've had. And it is, how can we make sure we keep youth engaged as we transition between in-person and online activities? And so I would like you all to put a question in the chat. And this is where the workbook starts. So if you want to be using the workbook or taking notes in the workbook, this is where you might want to start doing that. Otherwise, please put your questions in the chat so I know some of the things that you all are thinking about. How do I improve my donors' turnaround response time to give a gift? Yeah, so that's a very like operational kind of structural question. And one thing I didn't really talk too much about in my intro is that a lot of evaluations that I do, they have an outcome kind of, what is the impact of our programming, right? But they also tend to have an operational or an interim piece to it where you're asking, how is that happening? And this is a how is that happening question. So how do I work with my donors so that I can help them give their gifts faster? And then somebody had a question up earlier. I'm going to go find it again. Okay, wondering about program effectiveness, outcomes, and ways to improve. That's what it was. And so now that we have our questions, let's figure out how to answer them. And the next step of this process is to look at what are you already doing to answer your question. And for this question, for this portion of the process, I really encourage you to think about the very simple things you're doing to answer the question. So like, if you're talking to somebody, you're talking to a friend, you're having coffee with somebody, how might you talk about this, right? So you're thinking, okay, what are we doing? Like, we need to know how our students are responding to our programming. And you might say, oh, well, I was talking to a student one day and they said this. Or I was talking to a parent one day and they said this. So what are those things that are these natural processes and these things that are just happening in your work or in your organization that are helping you answer your questions? And so for this example, in this organization, we talk to the youth, right? So we see them every day, or we see them once a week, or however much it is, but they're there, we have access to them. So we are hearing from them what their experiences are. We are hearing from them what they think. We talk to the parents, maybe they're dropping students off, maybe they're popping in on a Zoom, maybe they call us for some reason, but we might hear from them like, oh yeah, we thought that was great when you did this thing, or, I know you did this, you did that program and my kid didn't come because they didn't like that. Or, they will tell you these very simple things that will give you a little bit of information about your program. And then you're talking to your staff, right? In the staff meetings, if you're in the office, you might run into them and they might say something. And so these are the things that are very anecdotal that we often take into account when we are thinking about what kind of decisions to make or what kind of program changes to make, or trying to self-assess what kind of impact we're having or what kind of outcomes we're having. And so then the next step of the process is you look for, so now we know some of these basic things, right? Now we know like, okay, well, we do have some information. We don't know nothing. We know these things and this is how we know them. The next step of the process is to look at what are your opportunities to gather more information, and what are you already doing to help you gather this information. So now that we've sat down and thought about this a little bit, we might say, you know what, we have a survey that we could use, or maybe we could write this survey, or you might come up with something like, I feel like we're getting a little bit of information, but we really need to do this, right? We really need to talk to people more. Or you might look at something like maybe you have a database or some kind of other piece of information that might, be giving you some kind of little feedback, or might be something that you could use. You might say, I work with, medical programs sometimes, or like clinics, and a lot of them have intake forms, and they take these intake forms and they keep them for their records, and then they file them away, or sometimes they shred them, they put them in a database. Could that be something that could be giving you some kind of information that you could be using to answer your question? So could we look at our attendance rate, right, to Zoom sessions versus in-person sessions in my example? That would help us kind of draw some kind of inference about who is coming and how people are feeling about that. And then, so for my example, one of the things that this program is going to do, what they're going to implement, is that they're going to design an activity to gather information from the youth, and all the program leaders are going to lead the activity. So this could be something that takes up a whole session. It could be something that takes up part of a session, but it's going to be like specifically designed. We're going to gather some information. Everybody's going to do it. So we make sure we're gathering the same information from all participants. We're going to hold a parent event, and this again is like just one of our parent events where we have people, we have food, maybe access to some resources, maybe, you know, us a party, but we're going to have some kind of portion of the event where we're going to gather some information from the parents. It might be a conversation, it might be, you know, like a board on the wall where people can write thoughts and ideas and sticky notes. It might be someone coming around with like a survey, but you know, we're going to do something where we're going to try to get some information from the people at this event. We're going to reach out to school contacts and community partners to see, you know, what kind of feedback they might have, what might they be doing, or, you know, if many of our students are attending the same school, we might talk to the folks at that school and see what they think or what they're noticing. And then we're going to dedicate time during a staff meeting to talk about what we found and some ideas. So again, this might be a whole staff meeting, or it might be just like a few minutes, but we're going to take some time to sit down with our staff and get some ideas and think about, you know, this question. And so basically what this methodology does is it takes these things, it's going to take a minute, but it's going to take these things and I like to use the term infusing intentionality. So it infuses them with a little bit of intentionality where we're turning these very commonplace things that we're doing, stuff that's happening already, and we're going to make them some more specific evaluation activities. An important part of this process is documentation or recording or somehow taking down all that information that we have. And so now, if you want to participate in the chat, or if anyone wants to speak up and maybe share a story or some thoughts, this is a great place for you to do that, to, you know, let me know how this lands. Are you thinking about anything? Are you noticing anything in your own programs that you're like, oh, hey, actually, we have this, and that would be a great data collection opportunity. And I'll wait a minute.
I'm happy to share an experience that I had that worked out well. So instead of like being a problem. So I ran a service learning program at a community college, and we did a lot of like end of semester surveys of students and community partners and faculty. So we were gathering all the constituent data, and we were doing a lot of reporting with it. So we weren't doing much to say like, what could we do to improve? And there was also this narrative that like at a community college that serves a lot of underserved student populations, that service learning was really like a privileged student thing. So it was like only students who came from privileged backgrounds participating, and they're the only ones benefiting. And we already actually had tons of data that demonstrated that we were actually supporting students, and we were able to then say, well, what else could we be doing? What data could help us tell this story, and kind of how could we improve then how we're serving student populations? So it was actually really effective to just look at our data in a different way, because we already were collecting so much and just not using it very well.
Yeah, I love that example. And that is exactly one of the things that I tend to do with my clients as well, is, you know, you think you need to do something new. You think you need to do an evaluation, you need to design something or develop something. You might have a lot of information that you can use, right? Like you might already have a survey that you could look at instead of creating a new survey, or you might have a database. I was talking to a group of, I was leading a workshop for people that were applying to a specific grant. And they were required to include evaluation in the grants. And they were asking me a lot of questions about like, how do we do this? What do we write? What do they want us to say? And then they would say things like, we already have this though. And I'm like, you can use that. You don't have to create anything new. Like you can use all of those things that you're already collecting. So thanks for sharing that. I love that. Anybody else want to share or a question? I love questions.
I think I have one I want to share and see. I run a company in Puerto Rico. We do community survey. We go into communities and bring arts. And we have this project with this community about bringing the arts to the community in a community really in the mountains, really far away. And one of the decisions for us was how we evaluate this program. And one of the decisions we made was video and audio. Before we get to the place, we start with the permission of the community, start interview for the people. And during the process of the creation of the community program, we also interview and document. And at the end, when we finish and when we create a little documentary about the whole process, and you can see the whole change of when we get there, people are like, oh, whatever, we don't need you. And during the program, how you can see in the video how everyone evolved to the end. And that's one of the way we did it. We didn't know we are doing like the right way because we wanted to do survey and question, but the people are like really into that community, don't want to answer or have paper. They just want to talk. So we adapted like through video and audio, and by the end we have a beautiful final result of like a beautiful video of like the impact we have in that community.
I love that. Yeah. So a really important piece of this process is what is going to be the best way to connect with your community, right? When we're doing evaluation, you can learn everything you want about how to design a focus group or how to design a survey. But at the end of the day, you know, is your community going to respond to that? Or could you just go and talk to them? And Joe's example also gives us a really cool example about how evaluation can connect to communication and communicating out with the community and to sharing your results and your findings. So you don't necessarily have to send over a report or put it on your website, or well, I would assume this is going to be on your website, but you know, you could have a video or something really cool to watch that was co-created with the community and not necessarily one of your standard like marketing campaigns. So I thank you both for your examples. Those are fantastic. And so, and that is actually a really great segue into my next piece, which is involving the community in the analysis of the evaluation or of the project or of the report that you're doing. And so as part of my little example project, we're also going to involve those same community members in our in our analysis. So we're going to take this information back to the youth. Maybe there was a survey, maybe there were some numbers or some kind of data points that we ended up putting together, and we're going to take it back to them and have another little activity with them and say, hey, what do you think? Does this sound right? This is what we heard from you and other people, and this is what we think we might do. You know, what do you think? Same with the parents, same with the community contacts and our partners, and the same with the staff. And all of these things can be, it could be a one-time, like, right? Like we could dedicate one time to talk to these folks, or it could be something continuous and ongoing. So it sounds like Monica and Joel, in both of your examples, this wasn't something that you just did one time and then you were done and you left and the evaluation was over. It was part of the process. It was part of what you were doing. And there's a continuous flow of data back and forth. And so, you know, one of the projects that I worked on a few years ago was that I engaged youth in a youth participatory evaluation project where they were basically responsible for evaluating their own schools. And so they were designing the evaluations, they were interpreting the data, they were like interviewing their classmates and like writing focus groups and writing surveys and all these things that were really cool. That's a very in-depth example, but there are other ways that we can do smaller things where we can start to engage the community in not only, you know, ownership over the data collection process, but the analysis process, so that we're taking things back to them and saying, hey, did we get it right? What do you think? Or even taking like raw data. And for any evaluators or researchers, you know, we're being very careful about confidentiality and all of that stuff, but maybe taking them some numbers or taking them some quotes and saying, hey, or taking them some raw video and saying, we think we're going to put it together this way. We think we're going to summarize it this way. Does that make sense to you? Is that accurately capturing what you said? You know, you're part of this data. Is that an accurate capture of what you were saying or what you were thinking when you said that? And then this is just kind of to round it out, an example of how you might communicate this with like a funder. And this is an example of something you might put in a grant report, or it could be also in a proposal. And it says, to evaluate our outreach, we design data gathering activities with youth, parents, teachers, and other community members. Our data showed that XYZ approach would support students as they transition between in-person and online activities. And we've made adjustments to our programming following this model, right? So like now we've taken this thing that we did, we started off with, well, we have some conversations with these people, like let's, you know, dig into that a little bit more, to having some more deeper conversations. And eventually we come up with this project that looks a lot more like something we might call research or an evaluation project. But it all came from originally how we were already engaging with that community, right? So like with the video example, like we're just doing this as part of our project, as part of how we're engaging with the community. You can take that and put that into this kind of language so that, you know, you don't necessarily need to put an evaluation on top of something. Like we're going to design, you can do that. I could sit down, you could tell me about your program. I could sit over here. I could write you a beautiful evaluation plan using all of my researchy things. And it might not even give you as good information as if you were to use the process that I just described, you know, that comes from this community and comes from the way that your organization already works. And then the last piece of this is like, now how do we make this into evaluation culture, like I was talking about in the beginning? And, you know, this is kind of a very simple example, but this is something that over time, the more you do this and the more you think about evaluation this way, and the more you start to ask these questions and look at data this way and start using the information and the data that you are just naturally collecting somehow, over time becomes more and more integrated in your processes and how you're doing things. Maybe you start to dedicate one staff meeting a month, or, you know, a half an hour a month to talking to your staff about this. Maybe you have a dashboard. Maybe you have, you know, a youth program and you're always connecting with the youth on this, right? And it becomes like very normal for them to be having these conversations. Maybe you're working in a medical setting and you have, you know, patients, and you have some kind of way that you engage with them on a regular basis through data. And maybe you have an arts program and you're kind of engaging them in the whole process throughout the whole thing. And eventually, you know, you're doing evaluation, you're doing really great, solid evaluation, and it doesn't look like a big research project. It doesn't look like a big thing that is added onto you. It's going to be a little bit of work. I won't say it won't be no work, but it's not this kind of busy work where you're filling out things and logging things that don't necessarily feel like they're really adding to your work. And then just the last piece that I have is, you know, how do we make this happen, right? That sounds nice, Allie, that just sounds great. How do I make that happen in my organization? I definitely recommend including evaluation in your budget and writing it into your proposals. These are just kind of your standard things. If you say you're going to do it, then you have to do it. Or at least there's something nagging at you from behind. It's like, did you do the thing that you said you were going to do? And doing these two things, I also think helps you, or I know it helps you take some ownership over the process and moves you away from this outside demand of, you know, being in a responsive place where you're reacting to a funder saying, hey, we need your data, and you being like, oh God, what do I say to them? You're going to start from the beginning and say, this is how we're going to evaluate our program. This is how we're going to assess what we're doing. This is the kind of money that we're going to spend on it. And then so you can tell them, and you can have like a more of a proactive stance in doing this. And I do recommend at some point, while I do think that there's a lot that can happen within the organization, and I try to work with organizations to help them figure out more ways to do this, at some point you are going to want to talk to a professional, either a consultant or looking at hiring staff members, or, you know, maybe there are some staff within your organization that you think would really like take to this type of work. But you should be talking to someone that knows a little bit about evaluation. I like to say that you need a geek. You need somebody who like works real deep in this and loves it and is like, oh, what if you did a focus group? That sounds great. Or I can think of the perfect survey to do for you. But people like me can help you, figure some of these things out. So, I can help you figure out the process of what I just described and what that might look like for your organization and how that might work for you. We can also help you with the first two pieces of like figuring out what kind of time and money you want to dedicate this to. So one of the services that I do provide is grant writing support and evaluation specific work. So if you had a program, you're writing a new grant proposal and you wanted to figure out how to write evaluation into it, that's something that I can help you do. And it's something that I would love to help you do. It makes me very happy when someone asks me to help support them with this. And I could tell you horror stories about folks that wrote their own evaluation plans and wrote the wrong thing, basically. And then when they hired me eventually, I had to come in, we had to do a little bit of cleanup before we got into the project. So, you can hire someone from the beginning that can kind of help you put together that plan so that you have everything set and ready to go. I'm gonna peek at the chat. Okay, just someone saying goodbye. Thanks for coming, Deb. And so, yeah, this is really the end of my content. The last piece is just more ways that you can engage with me. I do have a blog if you want to go read some of the things. It's kind of a mix of like tips, evaluation, content, as well as like some reflections and some more about me and like my personal story. I have a newsletter, and if you're signed up for this workshop, you're automatically added to my newsletter. You can unsubscribe if you don't want to be on it. So super easy. And if you really hate the idea of doing that, send me a message, I'll take you off. No pressure. I do provide free consultations. So if any of the things on here are like, you're like, I just need to talk to somebody about this, that is something that I can help you out with. You can book a time right on my calendar. I'm going to send out the slides after this, and these are all links. And all of these links are also in my workbook. So, and they're all over my website. I'm easy to get a hold of. So if you want any of these things, you can go find them. And then I also have a few resource downloads. One of them is the workbook. I have another workbook that's kind of more about evaluation planning and reflection. And then I have a couple of like one-pager tip sheets. And one of the one-pagers outlines the same process as well. So if it's something that you are like, want to think about a lot, it's like the kind of thing that you could just paste up by your desk or, have on your desktop because you want to look at it every day to learn a little bit about evaluation. So that's me. We do still have a few minutes for Q&A and to chat or to say hi. Emily is also putting these all these links in the chat, so they're there as well. And the workbook again, it sounds like some of you had some trouble downloading it, so we'll figure that out for next time. But thank you all for coming. Thoughts, ideas, reactions? I would love to hear what you think. Questions? Love questions.
I want to say thank you. I think sometimes this can be a scary topic, at least for me and for my organization. Every time we think about evaluation, it's like, okay, it's a bunch of numbers, how we do it. But it's the insight that you bring is really helpful and will help us to create something really beautiful. So thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. And that's, my goal is evaluation doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be something that you don't want to do, like it doesn't have to be something that is hard, not like it won't be work, right? But, it doesn't have to be this thing that's like, oh God, like very intimidating. I try to make it accessible and helpful for people. So thank you for saying that. All right. Well, you're welcome. I will close. I will hang on. I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'll hang out for a little bit for anyone who wants to maybe ask me a question off the recording.